I got on Ancestry.com, and from there I started building a family tree, basically. I had helped my daughter build this sort of rudimentary one, but then as I started getting on Ancestry.com, more and more people started contacting me, and I started to find out quite a interesting story. I also found two of my relatives who had written books earlier about family members, and so I looked at those two books as well. But what I found was a different story than the story that we typically see about Black America. It's obviously, you know, when I'm talking about Creoles from New Orleans, I'm talking about what I consider to be a race of Black people that originated in New Orleans. Originally, Creoles were considered people that were just born in the New World. So the French and the Spanish that settled here early on were, when their children were born here in the New World, they were considered Creoles, and that's how they sort of separated the pecking order. So people that were born in France were sort of on a higher pecking order than the children who were born here in the New World. And so as time went on, those children in the New World had relationships with slaves, had relationships with Indians, had relationships with free people of color. One of the things that kind of gets lost in Black history here is that many Africans came here with some of the early Spanish, conquistadors and explorers as free people of color. They came to explore. And one of the earliest free blacks that was left in the New World was an African that accompanied Hernando de Soto, who discovered the mouth of the Mississippi River, and he was left there with a tribe of friendly Indians. This is 1541, long before the Mayflower or even any real settlements were here in the United States. So when we start processing the narrative that we have about Black history, it started very early on. Originally with people that were free, had no connection to slavery, not coming as slaves. But what happened is this. As the explorers came and settled, they realized that they had the opportunity to cultivate the land, take advantage of all the natural resources. Obviously, the continent was populated by many different tribes of Indians, and originally they tried to enslave Indians. And so the Spanish, certainly who were the first explorers here, enslaved Indians, and they had a long history of enslaving Indians. But as time went by, the Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, British, French settlers hit on the idea of having African slaves. And so the first African slaves started arriving probably in 1512. So early on, there were African slaves here. My family, and the story about my family is really about two families. Both come from France. Both end up in New Orleans. One is a prosperous family from Canada, Quebec, Canada, and the other is a prosperous family that settles in what's now Santo Domingo and Haiti. And so they settle there. This is the Pavageau family, and this is who I really talk about in my book as sort of the Pavageau side of the family, and the Azores side of the family is the Canadian side of the family.